Before we move off, I was going to say, James mentioned the no tax on overtime. Jef, I have some ideas of some structural changes for the labor relations team. If that goes into effect, we'll talk offline there, right?
Yeah, we'll talk on Sunday maybe.
All right. Well, welcome back. I'm not really entirely sure how to start this. This is a different take on the Labor Thoughts podcast. As you'll see, we have some special guests with us. And for those that are listening, you're going to hear very soon who those guests are. Today is not your normal labor relations type issue. Today is just a review of what happened. I mean, January 2025 is already, like, enough has happened in that month to constitute the year, and I think we should just take the rest of the year off, if I'm being honest. But let's just jump in, and first of all, let's talk about who's here so everybody knows who they are. And for those watching, if you don't know who these gentlemen are right now, I would ask you to show me what rock you've been living under. But we'll let these guys introduce themselves, and then we're just going to dive right into the purpose of today's episode and, hopefully make some sense about everything that's happened. I was telling these guys when we were starting out, like, I don't normally say when an episode is recorded, just because we're never quite sure what the release schedule is. This one will obviously have higher priority, but we are recording this episode on February 10th, 2025 at 11:10 a.m. Eastern time. I'm saying that because the aim is to get this out in the next couple of days, but we may be out of date, and you're going to understand why very soon. But I've been talking a little too much here. Let's let everybody else with us have a chance to introduce themselves. And I'm going to start with the man, the myth, the legend, Marco.
Good morning, Ryan. Good morning, everybody. Marco Giamberardino, Senior Vice President, Government and Public Affairs here at NECA. Of course, work with the Government Affairs team, PR, magazine, a couple other operations here at NECA.
Thank you, Marco. And I have to jump over to a fellow Louisianian here. James, why don't you tell us about yourself?
James Payne, Director of Government Affairs for NECA. So great to be joining everybody this morning.
Thanks, James. And this guy needs no introductions. It's not his first time on the podcast, but I'll let him do it anyway. And he has honorary Louisianian title based off his background. But Jef, go ahead.
So Jef Fagan, I'm the Senior Vice President of Labor Relations and Risk Management and our General Counsel. Happy to be here today with, a team that we are using to monitor Trump administration developments. I'll just simplify it with that, but all the associated things that are happening with the new administration. It's an example of how our business units work together. So government affairs and labor relations are really working hard, along with safety, really working hard to keep everyone abreast of the rapidly changing environment. Just as recently as this morning, we learned that steel tariffs are getting imposed very quickly. So I'm sure Marco and James will tell us all about that. So thanks. Good to be here.
Yeah. Thank you, Jef, James, and Marco. I appreciate the introduction. And as Jef alluded to, the purpose of this podcast is we're going to try to cover what's happened over the last, month, not even month and a half just yet. And it's just to kind of hit on things in real time. I believe NECA Labor Relations and Government Affairs, we've always worked together behind the scenes on a lot of things. It's just that's becoming much more in the public eye now, given all of this. And we've been putting out information as quickly as we can and as accurately as we can. But obviously, things are changing by the minute, as Jef mentioned. And the purpose of this podcast today is just to kind of fill in between the lines, provide some commentary, but also give our team and Marco's team a chance to say more of what we're doing, how we're monitoring, and how we'll continue to serve the members and the chapters of NECA. So let's dive right in for our resident government affairs expert, the guy that's going to answer all our questions and make all of this make sense. Marco, what happened over the last month?
Well, I think I would expand that question more as what is happening.
True.
And we kicked off the year right away. For us, this all started January 3rd with the new Congress. James and I probably did about 15,000 steps that day, walking around Capitol Hill, visiting all of our new friends and checking out all the new offices, and lots of anticipation of what was going to be coming in the next couple weeks, because of course the backdrop to that then his inauguration was just 2 weeks later. And President Trump absolutely hit the ground running. He's been planning his comeback for over 2 years, and not only was he planning his political comeback, but he was also planning on what exactly he was going to do. He's been through this before, having been president the 8 years before. Back then, he didn't know a whole lot about Washington. He knew New York, but he definitely didn't know D.C. And he was determined to really just come out of the starting gates quick. And as most of the folks know who are listening, he signed somewhere about 150 to 200 different executive actions over the course of the first 24 to 48 hours upon getting sworn in. And of course, we were tracking them all as much as we could, especially the ones that are super relevant to our contractors and the industry. And, some of the biggest ones, which we're going to talk about today, are the pause on federal spending. And, that's caused some consternation because it's not just grants, but it also includes future contracts. There's a lot of infrastructure money tied up in there. All the different agencies that our contractors work for, whether it's Department of Transportation, Department of Energy, GSA, the VA, just about any big project that any of our contractors do federal work on. So that was a big thing we had to look at. And then, of course, within a couple weeks right afterwards, there was the talk of tariffs, and we knew that was coming. He had alluded to it multiple times, and then, just as we got to the end of January, February 1st, Saturday afternoon, that Saturday afternoon at 5:00, I got an alert from the White House saying that 25% tariffs were going to be imposed on Mexico and Canada, 10% on energy exports to Canada, and then, I'm sorry, I think I got that wrong, Ryan. 10% on energy imports from Canada, and then also an additional 10% tariffs on China. And then it's just rolled from there. And like Jef said just before, he announced yesterday before the Super Bowl at a press gaggle on Air Force One that he was going to impose 25% tariffs on steel, aluminum, copper, possible other components that our contractors work with every single day.
Yeah, I think you hit kind of the major metals that impact our industry right there.
Yeah.
So that's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. Backing up just a little bit, you talked about the number of executive actions that President Trump, put into place within 24 hours. I know this isn't something that's unique to Trump. Every president comes in and they have a slew of executive orders and actions. Would you say that his timeline and the amount that he's pushing out is more or less or kind of on par with the norm?
I would say the amount is a little more, but the compressed timeline was probably the most dramatic part of it. He wanted them all done those first 2-3 days. We were tracking, James and I were tracking every single one because one of the executive orders, in fact, repealed probably upwards of 100 different executive actions from President Biden. Biden did the same thing. He repealed a bunch of Trump executive orders, but he did it over a longer period of time. So it was sort of a reset, I think, in the minds of the Trump administration. But because they came in such a huge swath in such a short period of time, I think it felt like it was such a much bigger event for us.
So on average, the number is about the same. It's just, it felt so much more because it was just bam, bam, bam. Before we start kind of diving into like the details of kind of what Marco touched on there, James, I want to kind of hear it from your perspective. Do you see, is this something that you're accustomed to working with?
Things moved pretty rapidly, even in the context of the Hill, which is always moving quickly. In my conversations with Republican and Democrat offices, as it relates to the funding freezes, no one expected that. It's a huge overhaul. It's a huge federal overreach, and so no one was really prepared for that. Offices in both blue and red congressional districts were getting blown up from folks doing projects saying, hey, where's our money? What's going to happen? So a lot of my conversations have been around the lack of guidance with all of this, and everyone's kind of in a limbo right now. Marco and I have a meeting with the White House coming up this week, so hopefully we'll have a little more information after that. Looking at potential carve-outs for our industry. And then as it relates to the tariffs, Democrats are obviously accusing President Trump of alienating, two of our biggest trade partners with Canada and Mexico. But while Republican offices are exploring the potential possibility of using some of that revenue to cover the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act extensions. And one thing I did want to point out too, going back to the IIJA freeze and the IRA freeze, is a lot of that money has already rolled out to the states. And so, this is going to be a huge court fight. And so it'll be interesting to see how things play out.
I think court challenges will be the name of the game.
Absolutely.
I was working this morning to put together some information. We have a conference coming up, and Jef and our team have been trying to stay on top of what's going on just with the NLRB. That's probably a podcast in itself, but we got to kind of wait for the dust to settle on that. But that's going to be the name of the game on that, is court challenges. I guess in that kind of that legal realm, Jef, do you see immediate major impacts, or do you see this as a long, drawn out type process?
Well, I think there's certainly immediate impacts, and then we're playing the wait and see game on the long-term impact. I think certainly, and I can't help but unfortunately make some analogy to the COVID impact, right? So, going back to what happened with COVID was, the Trump administration's actions were at least a little more foreseeable than COVID, but I do think they've taken, most of us by surprise. And executive orders and change is one thing. The nature of the changes and the extent of the changes is, I think, what we're all dealing with now. But, getting back to COVID, COVID did a couple of things right away. First of all, it significantly disrupted the construction timeline, because jobs got shut down, right? And so, you have a client who contracted with you to wire a building or perform construction work at a building, and now you can't deliver because you can't get people on the job. Supply chain was immediately impacted because people couldn't, produce the products that you had relied on when you bid the job. We have a lot of the same issues now with regard to jobs that had been bid based upon expectations on supply chain and the availability of materials, and those costs are now going to skyrocket in a lot of different ways. And so, what do you do with that? Well, you have to go back to the same thing that we advised in the COVID crisis, and you have to rely on your contracts. You have to look at your supply chain, look at your supplies. Are there ways to alter where you're buying goods, and can you buy domestically now? All of those things. You have to look at your contracts, your contract language. Do you have price escalation provisions in your contract? Do you have a force majeure provision in your contract? Can you bring the client to the table to renegotiate the contract to make sure that you're, as a contractor, not eating all of these increases in costs. And the problem is we don't even know what that's going to look like from a scope perspective. We can't tell you what the steel industry is going to look like and what steel costs or copper costs are going to be in a month. Probably going to be higher, and but how high and how much of an impact is that going to have on the construction industry? We don't know, and that's why we've got the team that's probably going to update this podcast in 3 weeks. But those are the things that we're looking at because they're very real, practical. Am I making payroll next week type of questions.
We do plan on updating this. If you have questions or comments that you would like to submit, I'll make sure to leave some information in the description of this podcast. Please share them with us, and we'd be happy to address those if we can when we update this, probably in 20 minutes. So it's going to be pretty fast moving here. But let's dig into some of the details here. So James and Marco, you both kind of touched on kind of high level some of the things that have happened in the last month. Marco, I'm going to throw it to you. I want to know what was most surprising to you that came out in all of this.
I think because I lived through it the last time, there wasn't a whole lot I was surprised about in the end. At least on Canada and Mexico, we knew they were coming, but my gut kept telling me as we got into last week that somehow a deal was going to get cut before the midnight deadline on February 4th. And sure enough, I think it was around noon on Monday that there was an announcement about a deal with the new Mexican president, that she and President Trump talked, and they agreed to a 30-day delay in exchange for, I think, 10,000 troops were sent to the border, Mexican troops that is, and that there would be increased cooperation on dealing with the fentanyl trade, and trying to, deal with also some of the cartels that have been showing up on the border and trying to engage with our U.S. border agents. And I remember I was at the NEMR conference last week and saw that, and I said, I think by 5 o'clock today we're going to have a deal with Canada. And sure enough, same thing, 10,000 Canadian troops to help secure the northern border, and that this would all be revisited again in 30 days with both countries. The China, the 10% tariffs, I believe, did go in effect, but there are plans for President Trump, President Xi to talk in the next week or so, I believe. So we saw a lot of this, the first go around. And listen, this is what President Trump does, and this is why folks always refer back to his first book, Art of the Deal. This is what he does. He made it very clear he was going to do everything he can to secure the border, and I think he's definitely viewed tariffs as a huge tool to be that stick. I also do think he believes tariffs are going to be a key way, like James said, to offset changes to the tax laws. We get into the 2025 extension and permanency of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Congress did mention they were going to try to figure out how to factor in any possible revenue there. President Trump, I was at a speech he gave about 2.5 weeks ago, where he spoke at length about the benefits of tariffs and how that could offset revenue and how that could potentially lead to a further reduction of taxes on the average American. We did it for 100 plus years of our history, and I think he'd like to go back to some form of that. I think the other piece of it is I think he's looking at the potential benefits of what tariffs can do with respect to encouraging manufacturing here back in the U.S. Biden administration focused on that as well, and did it through a lot of investment. It was federal investment, for example, the CHIPS Act. But I do think President Trump also sees a push to rely on more U.S. materials and U.S. production and encourage U.S. companies to ramp up. And I think you're going to see that particularly on this steel and aluminum and other materials, when he announces his plans later today.
So again, more to come, right?
Way more to come. Ryan, I did do a little research on what happened when he pushed for steel and aluminum tariffs in his first term. And domestic production went up about almost 2% to the tune of about $1.5 billion on average. And it went up by every year afterwards, 1.9 in 2018, almost 1.9 in 2019, about $1 billion in 2020, and then upwards even more, 1.3 billion in 21. The 10%, there was a 10% tariff on aluminum, and the price went up on aluminum imports went up by about 8%. But also production went up as well by about almost 4%. So I think you see a little bit of a push and pull there, and that's only within a 4-year period. I think he's looking at this as a long-term boon for the materials side of the industry. I think he also said something about, there's been all this debate about whether Japan should buy U.S. steel. I know President Biden was not really for that. President Trump made it clear he's not really for it either, but he did say he was for some Japanese investment in U.S. steel, but not an outright purchase, because I think he believes it's U.S. steel and it should remain an American-owned company. So that's something else for us to watch.
Well, and something to make clear, because Jef mentioned it to an extent, and Marco, you touched on it too. I mean, as of this morning, the tariffs on steel and aluminum are, literally breaking news. Those are in addition to what was already put in place in his previous term. And just so that everybody understands, because I had to go back and refresh my memory on this, and James, Marco, correct me if I'm wrong, he put those in place in his first term, and those have remained since then. So it wasn't something even the Biden administration rolled back.
Exactly.
I do want to move off of the tariffs, but before we do, James, you said something that interests me. You have the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act from Trump's first administration, and it's expiring. What was the date? Can you remind me, or do you know off the top of your head?
Well, it depends on which provision you're talking about. So they all expire at different times. Most of them are about halfway through the year, though.
Of this year?
Yes.
Okay. So, and then the aim of this administration is to obviously continue those, but that's going to come at a cost to the federal government. So these tariffs could kind of play a role in funding that. Can you maybe touch on that a little bit of how that might look?
Sure. So they would essentially, I can't remember off the top of my head. I think it's a $5 trillion about pay for, right, Marco, that they need. So potentially using some of this tariff revenue to cover reauthorization of those tax breaks.
Gotcha.
And Ryan, they'll model out what this looks like over the next 10 years, because they always do 10-year budget windows. So that they're gonna factor in increased economic activity as a result of the permanency of a lot of these tax breaks that were enacted, and that'll count as revenue as well. But what's interesting is we got to factor in some of the new things that came out of the presidential campaign. No tax on tips, no tax on Social Security, no tax on car loan interest.
Overtime.
So these are no tax on overtime, exactly. So that's all got to be calculated as well. And then, of course, you've got members of Congress from the more high tax states like New York, Illinois, California, lobbying for some sort of fix to the state and local tax or SALT deduction. Right now, it's been capped at $10,000 per filing. There's been talk of maybe doubling that and doing a per spouse exemption, get it to 20. But that's something that's going to have to be addressed as well.
And so we haven't seen exactly what that tax package will look like. I believe the Senate Budget Committee is supposed to be dropping their first draft today, though, or this week, excuse me.
Before we move off, I was going to say, James mentioned the no tax on overtime. Jef, I have some ideas of some structural changes for the labor relations team. If that goes into effect, we'll talk offline there, right?
Yeah, we'll talk on Sunday maybe.
Yeah. A special day, right?
One thing, Ryan, that I wanted to add from a legal perspective, in addition to the fact that one industry that's not going to struggle during all of this is the legal profession. The lawyers are going to get paid to try to figure all this stuff out, along with the lobbyists. But one thing to keep an eye on, and we're already seeing it with the injunctions that are flying around the country, is Trump is going to continue to test the limits of the executive branch power. And so we will try to keep everyone apprised of important litigation that comes out that tests his ability to, for example, gut federal agencies, to fire folks, to grant folks severance if they quit now. All of those kinds of things are going to be subject to challenge, and they already have been. So that's going to be important to see how that plays out. I think, and this is not a political statement, this is just an objective observation. I think Trump's MO is to, go to category 5 and then hope he settles back at category 2 or 3. And so I think a lot of what we're seeing is him pushing the envelope and then settling back. We've already seen, the threatened tariffs and then the 30-day freeze, correct? So I think we're going to see more of that. I think we're going to see a lot of things like, Canada's going to be the 51st state, but not really. We're going to go after Greenland, but not really. And I think, the threat to take Greenland over may be a ploy to get more drilling done in Alaska. So those are things that are going to happen, and unfortunately, we're going to have to temper our expectations and not overreact to things, just see how they play out. And so, a lot of what we put out will be the best that we can put out at the time, with the caveat that, check back in a month.
Yeah. And that's something we're committing to as a joint team here, is doing our best to stay on top and keep the information as updated as possible. And when there are major changes, say a major court decision or, a new executive order comes out, that not only do we update you on it, but we make you aware of it in some way by, an email blast or something along those lines.
And like Jef said, this is part of an increased effort to have our teams work closer together, bring all our expertise together so that we can provide the best information for our contractors.
That's the goal here. I want to touch on one thing Jef said before we move on. He talked about kind of Trump's MO, so to speak, of where he kind of jumps out in front and then falls back just a little bit. I had a conversation with someone while I was at the Outside Apprenticeship Conference, and I'm mainly doing this to see if he listens to these. But he made a comment. He's like, it'll be interesting to see how this plays out over the president's term, because the executive office has kind of creeped its way into more and more influence and power over, the different people that have served in the office. And Trump is just taking a more radical, quicker approach to it. And he said that type of MO may trigger more of these court cases. He said, but the benefit will be decisions could potentially come out that actually define, here's the wall, here's the stop. He's like, so right now, take the NLRB for example. Trump came in and terminated the general counsel, terminated the number 2 general counsel, appointed an acting one, and then terminated a board member. And whenever he hit the board member, it's unprecedented. He can't do that. Well, we're going to find out. So it's cases like that it could be, at least for me as more of a logical black and white person, of like, okay, it'd be nice to know, as the courts go in and decide these. So it'd be interesting to see how all that kind of plays out. That's my color commentary. All right, well, guys, I think we've kind of circled tariffs quite a bit here. Obviously, they're going to continue to change. We've seen some of the impacts just in, with some of the ones that were announced and come out. It'll be interesting to see what happens with the new proposed tariffs on steel and different metals. I'm sure we'll get an update on that a little later today, or potentially over the next couple of days, and we'll update everyone as we can. But let's dive in a little bit more of some of the actions that the Trump administration have started, over this last month here. And I think a big one that has more impacts than people initially realize is the federal hiring freeze. We're seeing like some of the buyouts of, existing government employees, and then also a return to office mandate that is kind of bubbling up. Marco and James, can you kind of fill in a little bit on this? Also a general air of the feel on Capitol Hill as these things were coming out.
Yeah, Ryan. So, typical when there's a change in administration, of course, there's about 25,000 political appointees throughout all the federal agencies, and of course the rest of the executive branch. So those jobs always change over. But what's a little different is, President Trump did put out a executive action that said that no new positions shall be created, no positions shall be filled for at least 90 days. Doesn't apply to military or positions of immigration enforcement or national security or public safety, or anything relating to like Social Security, Medicare, veterans benefits. But it does require 90 days. All the different federal agencies have to submit to Office of Management and Budget, to the administrator of DOJ, and also to the IRS and to the White House, exactly what their plans are on what their workforce is going to look like, and whether it's necessary to fill any of these positions, whether it's necessary to cut any other positions. And that's bottom line effect is it's caused a lot of consternation, of course, amongst the career staff at all the different federal agencies. And, a lot of folks are worried about their jobs, bottom line. And these are all people who've been at agencies, their whole career, their whole life. And I think the one thing I've always thought that this could come up because, so whenever you hear about a government shutdown, there's a breakdown of workforce. There are people who have to go to work, even through a government shutdown, and they're deemed as essential and non-essential employees. And my guess right now, the way things are looking, they're going to take a look at these two lists and say, well, if you're non-essential, why do you have a job in the first place? And then if you're essential, what is your job? Does it need to stay the same, change, evolve into something else? It doesn't mean they're just going to swat all, non-essential workers, but I do think that that's going to be a pretty big target. And it's going to be, for anybody who knows the movie Office Space, it's going to be a sit down with the Bobs and what do you do here anyway?
Yeah, tell us what you do here.
Yeah.
Well, it almost sounds like, too, they've started to draw that line a little bit because you talked about who this doesn't apply to and you listed a number of offices. So, it's kind of a little bit of an indication already of essential and non-essential. And that's actually interesting. I never thought about it from that standpoint of if you're non-essential when the government shuts down, what do you do around here? Again, quoting the Office Space. So hopefully none of them have a red stapler that they're overly concerned with as we move into this.
So it's funny you said that because they're actually, some of these federal workers are coalescing and using the red stapler now as sort of like a symbolic poster for solidarity.
James, I guess jumping into it a little more, do you have anything to add to the federal hiring freeze, anything along those lines?
Yeah, I'll just echo a lot of what Marco said. There's a ton of anxiety for federal employees right now. You are seeing kind of mass exoduses in certain offices. I think the DOE sent a memo out to their people last week saying that they should, consider the buy-in. And a lot of them are leaving now, looking for other jobs. The only other thing I'll add is the coveted Doge caucus is also potentially maybe looking at trimming some of these budgets and using that revenue for TCJA as well.
And Ryan, just to add, so far as of today, about 65,000 workers have agreed to the buyout.
Oh, wow.
But also a federal judge is deciding whether the buyout's even legal. So again, more to come on that.
That's an interesting legal scenario that I might have our general counsel weigh in on as well. But I do want to kick it to Jef. So we're talking about this hiring freeze and all of these buyouts. I would love to do a deep dive analysis of what that looks like if somebody takes the buyout and then a judge later determines that it's not legal. Do you have to give that back? I really, really want to dig into that, but there's obviously a few other things to talk about. So, Jef, a real world implications of this freeze and these people getting bought out. What does that spell out for as these other things that we've talked about start playing out? Like, how does that look in the real world?
Well, one real world issue is the traffic in DC is going to get worse. So, everyone's got to come back to work, and the ones that are going to still have a job. I do think that there are significant legal hurdles with this buyout scenario. Let's just look at basic employee rights, that are protected by the Merit Systems Protection Board and, a government agency that is dedicated to protecting and advocating for employee rights. Can the executive come in and say, here's an unidentified pot of money that we're going to use to divest you of your job? And, does the president even have the authority to do that? I don't know. Some federal judge seems to demur to that idea. And so we'll see how that plays out. But I would say long-term or short to midterm ramifications would be, if you are relying on the federal government or certain federal agencies for, grants work or government contracts work, be careful, because if you thought they were slow before now, let's wait to see how the dust settles and see if they're even funded to do what they're supposed to do. And so and that's going to trickle down to state and local governments, right, that rely on federal money to balance their, finances each year. So, all of our contractors that do that federal, state, and local work may be impacted, down the road by, government efficiency, quote unquote. So we'll have to see how that plays out. And there'll be a ton of legal challenges to all of this. So, like I said, the legal industry is going to be fine, but the rest of the folks may be impacted by it, because these are theoretical fixes, right, that may take years to actually come to fruition. We're not going to make money off of tariffs right away, and it's certainly not going to get distributed in an effective manner to plug all the holes that are created by this. So there's going to be some upheaval for a while.
It's just interesting to see how all of this is going to play out. Jef talking about the interplay between the federal and the state government. It's something that you don't really think about. You're watching everything happen on the national stage, and you forget a lot of times, especially from our contractors' perspective that are doing work for the state, and they're thinking they're insulated from this. And then they realize the state has to submit something or has to request funding from a federal agency. And like Jef said, that money may not be there for that federal agency to operate. So I think hearing that, what I'm hearing is kind of cash flow is king to an extent, because if you're expecting these reimbursements or these payments, that it could be more delayed than usual. So Jef, I appreciate the insight there. I'm going to continue to rely on your expertise a little bit, because we have we have plenty more we can talk about, but we do have to keep this to a reasonable time and respect everybody's schedules today, because there's probably been 6 executive orders since we've been recording this. But let's talk about something a little more near and dear to the heart of the labor relations team, the National Labor Relations Board. Jef, there's been a little bit that's happened there recently. Can you touch on just maybe a few high points of that?
Sure. The NLRB is an interesting political animal, right? Because the president does routinely turn over the board when a new administration comes on. So, you'll see alerts that we've sent out that talk about the Obama board and then the Trump board, and what Trump did when he came on to undo a lot of the employee-friendly, more democratic, union-friendly activity that occurred during the Obama administration, right? So you tend to get, during a Republican administration, you tend to get more pro-management decisions out of the NLRB than you would in a Democratic administration board. And what Trump has done that most presidents do is he came in and he immediately fired the general counsel, who was appointed by Biden, and who had not only run a very pro-employee board, but also issued a number of opinions that were very pro-employee and anti-management. And so it's going to be interesting to see what happens with all of that work. Much of it will probably get upended and revert back to the prior rulings. But what President Trump has done is he's gotten rid of the general counsel, but he took an additional step and removed a board member. And that has been the subject of immediate legal challenge. It's never been done before, and don't know that there's authority to do that. I haven't dug into whether or not I think that he exceeded his authority, but it's quite possible he did. But one of the reasons why he did do it, and one of the status quo right now, is that there's a quorumless board that can't act. And I think the reason he did what he did was so that they would do no more harm, so to speak, right? So they can't act right now. So if there's a pending case before the National Labor Relations Board, it's not going to get heard. It's not going to get disposed. And when it does, it will be under a pro-Republican 3-2 majority at best, with a new permanent general counsel that will be friendly to the Trump administration. So if you have a case now, it's not going to get decided. And when it does get decided, it will probably be very pro-management. That's where we sit right now.
I think we've caught up to at least when we started the recording. We're probably out of date by now. But I do want to say just a thank you to you guys for making time. I know we're all busy. We're all running in different directions. So I appreciate you guys, making some room in your schedule to come on. Before we sign off, Marco, any last words for our members and chapters out there?
As always, don't be afraid to reach out, ask questions of us. You can get the whole team at NECA GOVT Affairs at NECAnet.org, or just ping me directly, Marco at NECAnet.org, or James at james.payne at NECAnet.org. We're on the ground, keeping our ears every minute of the day. Every time someone asks us what's happening again, we try to give an update and say, ask me again in 8 minutes.
Yeah.
I'll have something new for you.
James?
Yeah, just that kind of like what Marco said. This is a very volatile situation, and things are changing by the minute. I know we've probably said that a million times at this point during this podcast, but just know we're keeping our ear to the ground, and we're meeting with the White House soon, so hopefully more tangible updates then.
Yeah, it can't be stressed enough. That's literally evolving by the minute. Jeff, sage words of advice for our listeners out there?
Yeah, I would just suggest that that the contractors out there pull your contracts, your existing contracts, and take a look at your language on price escalation, supply chain disruptions. Hopefully, you have force majeure like language in your contracts. Review all of that, and if you're in a pickle on a job and that you're going to potentially take the brunt of cost escalations, sit down with the client and say, we're going to have to renegotiate this, and get legal help to do that, but be proactive in that regard. We're going to put out more information like that in the coming months, but just like with COVID, sitting and hoping it's going to get better is not a good strategy. Being proactive and taking advantage of the rights that you have and the contracts that you do have is important. And then if you're bidding jobs, obviously take all of this into account and try to do the best you can with smart bids and language in your contracts that allow you to roll with the punches 6 to 12 months out.
If I could just add to that, in addition to talking to your suppliers, but definitely if you're on a federal contract, talk to your contracting officer if you have any questions whatsoever. They're gonna be one of your best bets, at least in terms of keeping yourself covered for the latest and greatest news. And ideally, you probably have some sort of outside counsel that specializes in federal contracting.
Yeah, if the contracting officer hasn't taken a buyout, right? Well, I like to leave it on a cheery note, so I think we'll start to wrap there. Again, gentlemen, thank you so much for taking time for being here today. Obviously, there will be more information coming out from both of our teams on this, and we'll try to keep everyone as up to date as we possibly can. As we've alluded to, we're looking at doing this again. If anything you heard today you want to provide commentary on, or you want us to dig deeper into, you have questions or something you think we should cover that's going on in this, please feel free to send those in. You know how to reach the labor relations team. You have all of our emails, all of our information. I'll also leave it down in the description of this episode. Marco provided how to reach their team, so don't be shy. Reach out. But again, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching today, and we'll see you guys on the next one.